You know that feeling when you're watching something unfold and you can't look away? When the hairs on the back of your neck stand up because you know you're witnessing something real? That's exactly what happened when cameras caught Dean Ambrose and Roman Reigns walking through those hospital doors to see their fallen brother, Seth Rollins. Before we dive into this incredible moment that defined brotherhood in professional wrestling, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell because we're bringing you the most intense highlights that matter. This wasn't your typical scripted segment. This was raw. This was real. And this was the moment that reminded every single wrestling fan why the Shield wasn't just another stable, it was a brotherhood forged in combat, broken by betrayal, and somehow, impossibly, brought back together by injury and redemption. Let's set the scene. Seth Rollins, the architect, the Kingslayer, the man who had his knee absolutely destroyed in a match that should never have gone that far. One wrong landing, one miscalculation, and suddenly one of the most athletic performers in the industry was reduced to a hospital bed, wondering if his career was over. The surgery had just finished. The anesthesia was wearing off, and Seth was lying there, probably questioning everything: his future, his legacy, whether he'd ever step foot in that ring again. Now here's where it gets interesting, because Seth's history with Dean and Roman wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. This was the man who turned his back on his brothers, the man who sold out the Shield for a briefcase and a handshake from Triple H, the man who smashed a chair across Roman's back and left Dean lying in a pool of his own regret. 4 months, Seth Rollins was the most hated man in that locker room, not because he was a great heel, but because the betrayal felt personal. It felt real. And that's because on some level, it was. When you spend every single day with someone, traveling from city to city, eating meals together, training together, bleeding together in that ring, you form bonds that go beyond entertainment. You become family. And when Seth turned his back on the Shield, he didn't just break kayfabe, he broke something deeper. He shattered trust. He violated the code that says no matter what happens when those cameras are on, when we're behind that curtain, we're still brothers. But here's what makes this story absolutely captivating. Here's what makes this moment in that hospital room so powerful that it still gives longtime fans chills years later. Dean Ambrose and Roman Reigns showed up anyway. Think about that for a second. Really think about it. They didn't have to be there. The cameras captured them walking through those sterile white hallways, and you could see it on their faces. This wasn't about ratings. This wasn't about advancing a storyline. This was about two men checking on a third man who had once meant everything to them, even after he had destroyed that bond. Roman Reigns, the powerhouse, the big dog, the man who had every right to leave Seth lying there alone, came through those doors with concern etched across his face. And Dean Ambrose, the lunatic fringe, the unpredictable wild card who had perhaps been hurt the most by Seth's betrayal, was right there beside him. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just two brothers showing up for a third, regardless of the past. The beauty of this moment lies in its complexity. Because when Dean and Roman walked into that room, they weren't walking in as characters. They were walking in as Colby Lopez's friends, checking on a guy they had come up through the independent scene with, a guy they had shared dreams with, a guy who had made a terrible decision but was still, at the end of the day, one of them. You could see it in Seth's eyes when they arrived. That mixture of surprise, relief, and shame. He knew what he had done. He knew he didn't deserve their presence. But there they were anyway, because that's what real brothers do. They show up. They show up when it's inconvenient. They show up when it's complicated. They show up when every logical reason says they should stay away. And this is where the wrestling business reveals its most fascinating contradiction. We all know it's scripted. We all know the outcomes are predetermined. We all know that backstage, these guys are colleagues and professionals. But we also know that somewhere in the middle of all that fiction, real relationships form. Real respect develops. Real brotherhood emerges. And when those two worlds collide, the scripted narrative and the genuine human connection, magic happens. The hospital visit wasn't just a plot device. It was a bridge between the past and the future. A bridge between the betrayal and the redemption. A bridge between Seth Rollins the character and Colby Lopez the man. Because in that hospital room, with his knee wrapped and his career in jeopardy, none of the accolades mattered. None of the championships meant anything. What mattered was that when he was at his lowest point, when he was vulnerable and scared and alone, his brothers came back. Now let's talk about what this moment represented for the larger narrative of the Shield. Because this stable, this trio, wasn't just another group thrown together by creative. They debuted together through the crowd, three hungry young talents with a legitimate chip on their shoulders. They dominated together, holding every major title at once. They were unstoppable. They were the future. And then Seth ripped it all apart with one chair shot, one decision, one moment of weakness that changed everything. But the beautiful thing about storytelling, whether it's in wrestling or in life, is that nothing is permanent. Betrayal doesn't have to be the final chapter. Broken trust can be rebuilt. And sometimes, just sometimes, what's torn apart can be put back together even stronger than before. The hospital visit was the first thread pulling the Shield back together. It was the acknowledgement that despite everything that had happened, despite all the chair shots and the betrayals and the bitter words, there was still something there worth saving. There was still a bond worth fighting for. And here's what makes this so relatable, so universally powerful. We've all been there. Maybe not in a hospital after knee surgery, but we've all had moments where we betrayed someone we cared about. We've all made decisions we regret. We've all wondered if the bridges we burned could ever be rebuilt. And we've all hoped, somewhere deep down, that the people we hurt might show up anyway. That they might walk through those doors when we need them most, even if we don't deserve it. That's what Dean and Roman did. They showed up. And in doing so, they didn't just advance a wrestling storyline, they told a deeply human story about forgiveness, about second chances, about the power of brotherhood to transcend even the deepest wounds. The impact of this moment rippled through the entire industry. Fans who had written off any possibility of a Shield reunion suddenly found themselves believing again. The cynics who thought the betrayal had destroyed any chance of the trio working together again started to reconsider. And Seth Rollins, lying in that hospital bed, was given something more valuable than any championship belt. He was given hope. Hope that he could come back from this injury. Hope that he could wrestle again. And hope that maybe, just maybe, he could earn back the trust of the brothers he had betrayed. Because that's what this visit represented. It was an olive branch. It was Dean and Roman saying, "We remember who you were before the betrayal. We remember the brother we fought beside. And we're willing to see if that person is still in there." The wrestling business has given us countless memorable moments. Stunning title changes, shocking returns, brutal matches that pushed the boundaries of what the human body can endure. But moments like this, quiet, personal, emotionally resonant moments, these are the ones that truly matter. These are the ones that remind us why we fell in love with this art form in the first place. Because at its best, professional wrestling isn't just about the moves or the promos or the spectacle. It's about telling stories that connect with something real inside us. Stories about loyalty and betrayal, about falling and rising, about making mistakes and finding redemption. And the story of the Shield, of Seth's betrayal and the hospital visit that started his path back, is one of the most compelling stories the industry has ever told. When Dean and Roman walked out of that hospital room, they left behind more than just a recovering wrestler. They left behind a message that resonated with everyone watching. They left behind the idea that no mistake is too big to be forgiven. That no betrayal is so complete that it destroys brotherhood entirely. That showing up matters, especially when it's hard. This is the power of the Shield. This is the power of genuine connection in a predetermined world. This is the power of three men who came from nothing, built something extraordinary together, watched it all fall apart, and then, impossibly, found their way back to each other. And it all started with a hospital visit that nobody saw coming but everyone needed to see. That image of Dean and Roman walking into that room will forever be etched in wrestling history. Not because of any spectacular move or shocking twist, but because it was real. It felt real. And in a business built on illusion and entertainment, real is the rarest commodity of all.